Remember back to when we used the Pico color space converter. Well, you probably don't need to use this anymore because there's a new feature with the OCIO version 2 config that basically converts all of these textures on the fly so that you don't have to go through this step. The way it works is that, let's say I go to our material and we find our Hubert textures. We have our texture samplers right here, and then we have this option for color space. This color space is asking you, what is the color space of the image that you are bringing in? Auto is what you get by default if you're loading in an old scene file. However, if let's say I browse for Hubert's diffuse texture now, so let's say I just go for this diffuse JPEG, you'll notice that it automatically changes to sRGB. So it recognizes, hey, you're bringing in an sRGB, that needs to be converted to ACES-CG, in other words, our rendering space, and it does that all for you on the fly at render. So basically, if you just tell Redshift what color space the image is, then you're good to go. What you ought to know is that for any 8-bit image, 8 or 16, so a JPEG, PNG, anything responsible for the color of something that's not 32-bit, you want to set that to an sRGB transform. If, let's say, you have an HDR though, then you want to instead go down here and use the Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB. And any signal that's feeding into a shader, so like let's say you decide to use the roughness or a normal map or anything like that, those guys need to be set to raw. So this is raw down here, that's good. We have a bump map and that is also raw, like so. So when you're making these shaders, most of the time, if you have a texture map that's responsible for the color, that'll be sRGB, most likely. Also be sure that this custom gamma here is set to 1, if that's not. So custom gamma to 1, color space sRGB, and then we have everything else that's driving the signal of the shader set to raw. If we go now to our HDR though, so we go to our HDRI lights, if we just take the non-converted HDR, so say we go like that, we want to set the color space to Scene Linear Rec 709 sRGB. So that right there is what you want for HDRs. Otherwise, again, RAW gets used for the signals that drive shaders. And that's pretty much it for the most part. What happens when you select a color here in the spotlights is that these colors again get converted to the rendering OCIO rendering space right here when this is checked on. So again, that transform input colors, it's saying, hey, take this color swatch and transform that into the correct space for Redshift. So again, you don't have to really think about that. I just want you to know what that is trying to do. Let's go ahead and adjust this backdrop real fast. And by the way, if you do want to take an existing ACES-CG image, just set the color space down here to ACES-CG. There we go. Now, when we go to play this, we should see a much improved result. Okay, and there we go. Looking much better. It's still a little bit weird on the exposure. However, all we need to do is we can take down our f-stop if we want, or take that up. Or better yet, let's just bring this back to 9. We can just adjust the lighting. And if you are trying to convert from an old scene file, this may happen to you where the exposures are off on your lights. So do be prepared for that. However, I just want you to know that now everything is working much, much better. Much more as it should be. So there we go. Now we can take those 2 exposures down and we're back to the proper rendering that we're used to. From here, you can go crazy with LUTs. You can go through all these other post effects as much as you want. When it comes to exporting this image to other applications, such as Nuke or Fusion or Affinity Photo, whatever, I do believe that the workflow is still the same. The idea is that you can either take care of this view transform here in Redshift and apply these camera effects settings, this color management, to the final image, which again, we can find settings for that in the outputs, post effects, these color LUT controls. So you can check that on, and that will become part of, let's say, an HDR file that you export. Or you can decide to take the display transform and use that, let's say, in Nuke, or use that, or I guess defer that process later on down the pipeline. But either you do it here in Houdini, or you do it down the road in Nuke, and you're just trying to give somebody the scene referred data to work with. From there, either you or them, they can basically apply the display transform however you see fit, and that gives you the final image. So with those ideas in mind, I hope this helps you. Again, there's really actually a lot less to know with this new update, so that's kind of nice. Hopefully this is more convenient. I personally enjoy this workflow much better. Saves us the step of having to go over here to the Pico color space converter. And that about does it for right now. In the future, if there's any further updates, then I'll let you know.